Hello, this is Diana. This is my Trailblazers of the Universe YouTube channel. On my channel, I'm helping you fearlessly and unapologetically live your best, most authentic life. I'm helping you break through your barriers and transcend any limitations you may have. If that sounds good to you, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons. So today's weekly intuitive message is really just about grieving your old self. Now, a lot of us experience a lot of grief. I've experienced a lot of grief myself, right? And usually when we think of grief, we think of deaths, right? But and me, I've had my mom end her life. I've had close friends pass away unexpectedly. Tragic events happen, right? And I've experienced grief from all that, and there's a process for that. But what a lot of people don't always talk about or underestimate is grieving the loss of your old self. So this is something I really experienced because my old self was connected to addiction, substance addiction. Having toxic relationships, not knowing how to manage my emotions, being like the party girl, the fun girl, an empath who didn't have boundaries with people. I would give more than I would receive. I always felt like my moods were unstable. I even identified with being bipolar in the past, but I don't identify with that anymore. Some of you know I went through, a lot with the medical system, with, trying to diagnose me with anxiety, which I do believe I do have anxiety, but I just have healthy ways to cope with it now. But bipolar was something I didn't really identify with. I just had mood swings, and I didn't know how to manage them. I know how to manage my emotions, and I didn't have proper coping skills. I had a lot of energy, but not an outlet, or not healthy outlets. So because of that, I identified with the bipolar. I had my grandma was bipolar too. Just some examples of some very solid beliefs I had that I thought I was, and then I identified with, and identifying with trauma, my life experiences, right? That it's very hard to let that go when that has been who you identified yourself with. As an addict, as someone that wasn't in healthy relationships, as someone that didn't have boundaries, as someone that had mental health issues, right? Felt misunderstood, as someone that, had a lot of issues with family, with parents, or an unhealed inner child. These are all labels that I really believed that I had. And I'm not saying these weren't issues that need to be addressed, but I identified so much with these labels that either I gave myself or society gave me, or it was very hard to let go of that. But there's a process that comes with grieving that. But there's also a grief process for loss of your old self. That's probably one of the biggest sources of grief you can have, and it's very important. Some people underestimate it. The grief of my old self was one that was very hard, and basically it's like everything you identify with your whole life, it's a part of you. And I made a little short a few weeks ago that I talked about you don't have to forget your past, you integrate it instead. So watch that. That's kind of related to this, but that's kind of like the next steps. But you have to allow yourself time to grieve your old self. When you go through grief of your old self, when I'm not identifying as an addict anymore, I'm not identifying as bipolar anymore, I'm not identifying as someone that has toxic relationships, it's not that those things don't exist inside of you. You're acknowledging that they exist or they existed, but you can choose to be a different person. And when you make that choice to say, you know what, this did happen to me, I'm accepting this, but you know what, this doesn't need to be my whole life. This isn't my whole identity. This is a very small part of the entirety of my soul, right? We've attached so many emotions to it, and just attachments in general to that identity, that it feels like you're losing you. People go through their dark night of the soul, where everything that they thought was true, right, wasn't, or you're losing things in your life that aren't meant for you, or that aren't aligned with your highest self and your life purpose, and the things that aren't really you. It's like figuring that out. So when you lose your sense of self, the person you identify with for all these years, and especially if you're making these changes at a later age, and you've been through a lot of pain and trauma and a lot of heavy emotional experiences, it can feel like a part of you, your soul, is gone. You can go through a period of depression, just like you would grief of someone that passed away that's close to you, or losing a friend, or going through heartbreak, losing a relationship, right, or having a breakup or something, right? There's a grief that comes with the loss of your old self. And You can almost feel like you don't know who you are anymore. You have an existential crisis sometimes when you try to make a lot of changes, especially in a shorter amount of time. Maybe everything fell apart and you were kind of forced to make these changes. Maybe they weren't by choice, and that can be even, you can have the shock, just like you would with grief, right? So it's important to acknowledge that when you are evolving, becoming a different version of yourself, especially the bigger the change, that's a bigger like vibrational change. It's way different from who you were. It's almost like a shock to your nervous system. And sometimes we might do things to self-sabotage ourselves to bring us back to that old self. So just take the time to grieve your old self. Take a time to rest and really reflect back. It doesn't mean you have to lose yourself just because you're making changes that are going to improve your life, whether it's by choice or not. Or maybe you got in a bad situation and you're at the point where shit went downhill and you have to you don't have a choice. You have to go in a direction that's completely new to you and it's like healthier and better, right? And it can be scary when our subconscious is being forced to like reprogram ourselves when we identify as this. Our subconscious wants to feel like safe, secure. They want what's comfortable, right? It's a defense mechanism, right? To self-sabotage even, or to feel uncomfortable. Like that's not comfortable to your nervous system, especially when we're used to like the ups and downs of maybe a chaotic life. You create those chemicals and you almost become addicted to them. It's almost like a rush, like, oh, here's some trauma, here's some toxicity. Like that's kind of like a rush to your nervous system. You got used to feeding yourself that rush, or maybe you got away with something you weren't supposed to be doing, or whatever behavior it is, you know. Especially I'm speaking more on like the addiction kind of lifestyle. You're used to the rushes, you're used to the excitement, you're even used to the instability, you're used to the roller coaster, and when you try to take that away and we're trying to make everything stable, when it's been like this, your nervous system freaks. That's not used to that, and it'll find other ways to stimulate it, go back to the old self, or you can feel like you're in a state of shock, and it could be just a major period of grief. But it's not only grief of your old self, it's like everything attached to the old self. What's attached to your old self? Your identity, maybe you had friends, behaviors, habits, relationships, right? So you're not just losing your old self, you're losing everything that was attached to the old self. That's why it can feel like a major loss. It can feel like you have like a hole in your soul kind of. It can be very dark, but just know that it's also important to give yourself space to grieve that part of yourself, because sometimes when we make too many changes too fast, and I know this from experience, I did this myself, it can be overwhelming. And then so it's important to ground yourself. It's important to rest, to reflect back on maybe why you're making these changes, and just to kind of rest more. Just like when you're going through grief, it's of any kind, it's good to like eat healthier, exercise more, right? Especially if your nervous system's been very activated, you have a lot of trauma. Grounding is very important. Breath work, Wim Hof breath work was good for me. Exercising, grounding myself in nature more, kind of to ground all these changes, right? It's very important. Just taking it easy on yourself and taking it slow. Sometimes we want to make too many changes at once. Sometimes when we're healing, we can want to do so many different things because there's so many different areas that need healing. Or when we're becoming a new person, you make one change and you're like, oh, I need to change all these other areas of life as well. And then that can be overwhelming too, because you're just pulling that rug out, right? And so anytime you're making major changes like that, just give yourself time to process. Give yourself time to slow down, slow your roll. Give yourself time to integrate the changes too. You just don't want to overwhelm yourself. You don't want to be in shock. Consider it like a grief process, just like you would if someone passed, right? What advice would you give yourself or someone else if someone had passed away, right? Think about that and try to take that advice. And allowing yourself to feel the emotions, even to feel the grief, to cry, to be mad, to be aware when you're trying to self-sabotage into your old self, to just be very gentle with yourself and know that you are making these changes for the better. And remember why you're making these changes. It can be very uncomfortable. It can be lonely at times. Just remember there's a reason you're making the changes, and it will be worth it in the end, I promise. But you might go through a dark period. Through that darkness, you do more soul searching. You find out who you are more. You find things that you enjoy as your new person. You're creating a new identity for yourself. You're creating a new you, which is actually really exciting. And we don't grow inside our comfort zone, right? It's outside our comfort zone. So just know it's part of the process, and just treat it like a normal grieving process, and be gentle on yourself, and you're doing better than you think. And life will get better. It just you're going through that transition period. That's all I have for today. If you like this content, hit those like and subscribe buttons. I also have a Facebook group, an Instagram, and a TikTok. The links are in this video description and in my channel description. I also offer intuitive transformational coaching if you need help getting your life together. You're going through a dark time, dark night of the soul, spiritual awakening, mental health issues, addictions, grief, anything like that. I'm here to give you intuitive guidance on how you can heal and transform your life. My contact information is in this video description as well. Have a good day. Namaste.